not low level in the sense of unimportant, but low level in the sense of nonviolent offenses that still really cause problems for communities, but do not respond well to jail and prosecution as a strategy or a solution, but still need a solution. So that's what our team works on. And we're here to talk about LEAD. This is purely informational, so all questions are good. We're not assuming any baseline knowledge. And we're not here, this is my like top line thing that I wanted to say at the very beginning. We are not here to, there's no foregone conclusion. LEAD is in operation in Seattle. It is about to launch in Burien. Those are decisions by those communities to try these approaches. And we, Chris and I also work with communities all around the country that have decided to adopt LEAD. Never do we go like promote it, right? We're not selling you anything. This is an approach that some communities choose to try, and it works when communities, are enthusiastically and voluntarily working together in a different way to solve these kinds of problems. So if this does not feel like a good fit for your community, that is totally fine. If it did feel like a good fit for your community, though, why we're here now is that King County last fall, identified a pool of funding for up to 3 communities outside of Seattle to try LEAD if they want to. And Burien has already claimed the first slot. So there are 2 remaining sort of columns of funding. And we're trying to figure out where this is wanted. And so it is possible that White Center would be a good fit. We have a very strong relationship with your law enforcement agency, and so in that way it could be a good partnership. And so we're really here at the very beginning stage of exploring whether this is something that we'd like to do here. You're like, what are you even talking about? So that's what my colleagues here are going to explain after they introduce themselves.
I'm Brandy Flood. I am the lead program manager for REACH. We do the clinical arm and collaboration.
I'm Chris Nerup. I work with Lisa at the Public Defender Association. The vast majority of my work is for a little side entity we have called the LEAD National Support Bureau, which provides technical assistance and support to jurisdictions that are interested in replicating LEAD. And as Lisa mentioned, we're working literally with jurisdictions from Maine to Hawaii, ranging in size from 11 or 12,000 to Los Angeles, second largest city in the U.S.
And what did you used to do before you worked on LEAD?
So my background is, I should also clarify, we don't do public defense, and I am not an attorney. So
that's why it's not standing up.
I actually came to this work to sort of help design and implement what the social service side of LEAD would look like. I come from a lengthy background in public health and behavioral health interventions with people who are primarily homeless and primarily substance using.
Hi, my name is Natalie Walton Anderson, and I am an attorney. I should stand up. And I work for the King County Prosecutor's Office. I've been in the criminal division for 22 years, and I direct report in terms of being the prosecutorial liaison position to our elected Dan Satterberg. But I am very curious to hear about what the issues are here in White Center. I will also tell you that I live in West Seattle. I have 3 boys, and we are always in this area. So this neighborhood is also really important to me and my family because we spend a lot of time here. So the issues that are present here are important to me personally and also professionally. So I'd love to hear kind of what the needs are so I can not only report that back for LEAD, but also to my elected. So thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What is LEAD?
Oh.
Perfect.
Tell me.
Let me interrupt.
Okay.
And I think we're going to get right there.
Okay.
So for those that haven't met me, I'm Brian Howard. I'm the precinct commander, so I'm in charge of all law enforcement services in this area.
I didn't give a bio. I guess I feel. That was just my name. My name is Brandy Flood. I'm born and raised, grew up in the Rainier Beach area. I've been doing this work for about 20 years, master's in social work, doing harm reduction and working with homeless populations for the last 10 years through REACH, and that's my contributions to this.
So Chris, what is LEAD?
Great. So what I'll give you is a quick thumbnail sketch, and then we want to try and get as much feedback and conversation going as possible. So LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It began as a small pilot demonstration project in the Belltown neighborhood of Seattle back in October of 2011 and has been operational in Belltown ever since. That was our sort of flagship program. And so just real briefly, LEAD grew out of mutual dissatisfaction with the status quo on the part of a wide and diverse group of people who frequently did not agree on anything at all. But what they all agreed on was that the status quo at that time was not working. So what we had was a situation where there were some people who were extremely critical of the Seattle Police Department due to massive racial disparity in drug arrests. So in a city where 8% of the population is African American, about 60% of those being arrested for low-level drug offenses were black. So there was a lot of criticism of the police department on that side. On the other side of things, you had people who were very critical of the police department due to the existence of very publicly visible open-air drug markets where people were buying, selling, using drugs out in public. And so on one hand, you had groups of people who kind of wanted the police to do a little less. On the other hand, you had people who wanted the police to do a little more. And so the police department and the prosecutor's office were kind of caught in the middle of this. And so this prompted us.
And just to break in, there was also dissatisfaction within the police department, which is not something that those of us outside were super tapped into at the time. But it turned out they had their own critique of what was happening. They felt that it wasn't particularly effective, and they were open to trying something else as well. So actually multiple angles of shared dissatisfaction.
Yeah, and then just in line with that, I mean, the first time I ever had heard someone say, we can't arrest our way out of this problem, it was Captain Steve Brown of the Seattle Police Department, who was in charge of the West Precinct. And Captain Brown actually turned out to be a seminal person in the development of LEAD, because in a rather contentious meeting where we all were agreeing that the status quo wasn't working, Captain Brown just kind of held up his hands and said, you know, assuming everything you guys say is true, what would you have the Seattle Police Department do differently? And he was genuinely asking that question. He wanted to know, give us a way of dealing with this issue that is going to be more effective than what we're doing now. So we focused on three basic questions, one of which was, what if we could make arrest the strategy of last resort for police officers coming into contact with people for low-level drug offenses? The second question was, what if we could take what is almost uniformly a bad experience, getting handcuffed and being taken to jail, and change that into something that was positive, and positive not just for the individual, but for the police and for the community as a whole. And the third thing, and this was the icing on the cake for all of this, what if it was actually cheaper than what we're doing now? And so
more effective.
And more effective. And so LEAD is a direct outgrowth of that. And so just real quickly, our original model for LEAD was that it would be a post-arrest pre-booking diversion program. So officers would absolutely have grounds to make an arrest of an individual for a LEAD-eligible offense. They would run a records check to see if the person had any exclusionary convictions for violent offenses in their past. And then if those two conditions were met, the police officer could offer the person a referral to case management. And if the person wanted the referral to case management, the officer would call a case manager and they would show up on the spot. So it's not giving them a business card. It's not saying call this number or go by this office next Tuesday. So, and that warm handoff is a critical piece of this. That makes all the difference in the world. So that was our original model. We started in October of 2011 in Belltown. Almost immediately, we started getting feedback from some of the frontline officers who were doing this. And their feedback was, we're out here every single day. We know these folks, we know their families, we know what high school they went to, we know what crimes they're involved in. Why in the world do we have to wait until we have grounds to arrest this person in order to make them an offer of help? And so, and in fact, what ended up happening was we actually had individuals who were self-referring themselves by coming up to police officers and asking to be arrested in order to get into LEAD. We had a woman who approached two police officers, opened up the palm of her hand, and she had beautiful rocks with cocaine in it. implemented what we refer to as a social contact route of diversion, which allows officers in the course of their routine work who encounter individuals who are committing law violations attributable to behavioral health conditions, primarily substance use in this case, to make a social contact referral into lead. And as time has gone on, that is the primary route by which individuals are coming into lead in Seattle and in many other jurisdictions. So just to wrap things up, that's where lead came from. That's a thumbnail sketch of what it is. Brandy can talk about what the intensive case management looks like. Natalie can talk about the prosecutorial side. But so circling back to where I started, lead was designed to address a specific issue where everyone agreed that the status quo was not working. What we have seen since is that jurisdictions have very different reasons for wanting to do lead. So, for example, the second area in the US to do lead was Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe, New Mexico has no outdoor drug market at all. What they did have was their property crimes unit looked at everyone they had arrested in the preceding 12 months for mail theft, shoplifting, and breaking into vehicles. And what they came up with was that pretty much everyone on that list was someone that was known to Santa Fe police officers to be doing that activity to support a drug habit. So that was why they implemented it. And we have seen very, very different reasons for why jurisdictions decide to implement lead as time has gone on. So just last thing, so we started in Belltown. We have since expanded to be active now in 4 of the Seattle Police Department's precincts. So we are active in downtown, which is West Seattle, Capitol Hill Central District, which is the East Precinct, North Seattle, which is the North Precinct, and we're just started in the South Precinct. The one precinct that we are not in is the one adjacent to you, which is Southwest Precinct of the Seattle Police Department. So we are going to be operating in Burien very shortly, which means that you will be a pocket in between Burien and then Seattle, but we're not in the pocket just immediately north of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it too early to ask a question? Do you want me to wait? So when they get arrested and referred, are they not ever charged with the crime, or?
So there's 2 ways, the arrest diversion and social contact. For the arrest diversion, the prosecutor's office has agreed to give up one charge, and the police have agreed to give up 1 arrest in favor of another introduction to treatment. And typically what that is, and Brandy can talk about that more, is a psychosocial intake. That's 2 to 3 hours that kind of goes through a person's history, their use history, what their needs are, all of those things. And the prosecutor's office has said, we will give up this 1 charge if they complete this intake within 30 days.
So is that one time forever, or one time that?
Just that 1 charge. So we have.
So if they do it again, then, or something different, then they get another one time?
So, in the, I guess
I'm
the,
sorry, I don't-
no, I think this is a really great question to ask, because I think this is something that people kind of want to know, is initially, let's say a first contact, Major Howard would say, I'm gonna agree to divert you to lead, and he's gonna get on the phone and call either, it would work for whatever your community decides, but he's gonna call the outreach worker or the case manager to come meet him either at the scene or precinct or whatever the mutually agreed place is. They would sign a release of information to say, I'm willing to work with LEAD, as a voluntary program. I'm willing to share information with the prosecutor's office and case managers and law enforcement. And then at that point, the case would come to us as it would any other case. We would wait 30 days and check in with the treatment provider to see if they actually completed that intake. And that's just that 1 case.
Okay.
If the next day, or 5 days later, or 31 days later after they completed their intake, law enforcement ran into them again, it's law enforcement's up to their discretion whether or not they're going to arrest, send them back to the case manager, re-refer, or any combination of those things. And again, law enforcement hasn't given up their discretion in this agreement, and the prosecutor's office, if we did get a second case, would utilize its own discretion to kind of figure out what it is that we wanted to do. But no, I think the term that we use a lot is, LEAD is not a get out of jail free card for future crimes, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
we wanna get information about how that person's doing, cause, you know, it takes time sometimes to engage, actually a lot of times to engage people. So it may defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do if we decide to arrest or charge, but it also may be for safety reasons of that person in the community, that person does need to be arrested, and it doesn't mean that lead can't still work, so I hope that helps.
It does help clear it up. I just thought that the crimes kind of stacked up at a certain point, so that's what I understood. I don't work with law, or I'm not a lawyer at all, but, that's what I thought, is if they did a certain kind of crime over and over, then that was, considered in other offenses, that they could, that a judge or somebody was looking at. So I was just kind of, misunderstanding, I guess, but it sounded like those, initial early crimes were going to be kind of ignored.
No, you're right, actually.
Okay.
In recent memory, felony crimes do sort of stack like we're talking about, meaning that if you don't charge one and one doesn't get, and somebody doesn't acquire a conviction, if they are charged in the future under some circumstances, that might diminish their what's called sentencing range. And you're absolutely right that could. The reason though that this approach is one that many people have come to rally around is that stacking did not prove to yield better results. Does that make sense? It is very expensive, and people were going, back then, people were going to prison for long periods of time for very, in the case of drug crime, possession or delivery of tiny, tiny amounts of drugs due to addiction, and they would spend years in prison and then come out pretty much where they started, or if not worse off. So yes, the fact that you're talking about is in play probably. And yet, what turns out to be true, Chris didn't mention, but the reason that police and prosecutors agreed to try LEAD in the first place was an agreement to do a very rigorous evaluation. And we did do that. It was independently funded and conducted by the University of Washington. And it turns out, so we had a control group, people who went through LEAD, people who got business as usual, including the exact thing you're talking about. The people who went through business as usual committed more crimes after that point of where they could or could not have gone into LEAD than the people who went into LEAD by a fairly significant margin. And they also went to prison a lot more, and they went to jail a lot more, and they got prosecuted a lot more, so it cost a lot more. So we were getting better results for less money. Now, there are many ways in which we could be more effective than it is. There's a lot of things we don't have. We don't have the housing resources that we need. We don't have lots of things. So I don't think we've scratched this. I think we have not reached the ceiling of how effective we could be, but what this experiment showed was that what we're doing otherwise is profoundly ineffective. You know what I mean? Like that, the case for that is not strong. And so this has all been kind of a process of unlearning, like, what of what we've been doing is helping and what of what we've been doing is harming, and we're starting to see that a lot of the old practices were actually compounding the problem. That does not mean that we've patented how to fix the problem, but continuing on that old path that was performing less well does not seem super well advised. So.
Okay, thank you.
One question more for the prosecutor's office. It was announced, I believe it was last fall, we weren't sure, that the prosecutor's office was not going to charge low-level crimes. And has that had an impact on people saying, well, if you're not going to prosecute, why should I worry about it? You know, stats or yet, or is it just true?
So there were two announcements around last summer and last fall. One was our district court unit, based on resource issues and a bunch of other things, much to the dismay of King County Sheriff's Office. Our office did a massive decline of misdemeanor cases that were rather old, and that was something that our office did based on a lot of resource issues, and we probably could have done a better job of communicating with our law enforcement partners about that and planning. The second announcement was that we were presumptively not, and I wanna clarify that, we do prosecute misdemeanor offenses in King County, for unincorporated King County. The priorities are typically driving under the influence cases and assault for domestic violence cases. It doesn't mean that we don't prosecute other misdemeanors, and I'm saying that those are the
No.
priorities in terms of community safety. So we do prosecute other misdemeanor offenses, but there was a need to do this clearing of backlog. The second announcement that came out is that our office, after vetting and again looking at resources, everyone's looking at resources, is trying to figure out the most effective and best use of our time, is that we were no longer presumptively going to file any simple possession cases, simple drug possession cases under 1 gram. And that does not include drug delivery cases, drug delivery with intent cases. Those are still cases that we look at seriously based on the conduct. And so we did that after vetting that with many of our community justice partners, but also with our line officers to determine what sort of effect that would have. In terms of lead, what Chris spoke about earlier in terms of social contact was a trend that we were already seeing before our office made this decision. The majority of cases that were coming through our office from law enforcement were actually social contact referrals. So what the trend appeared to be is when officers could, they were proactive in doing what we ask them to do all the time, which is trying to refer somebody before they actually commit a felony offense. And so they were referring people that way. Now, it doesn't mean that we still don't get arrest diversion cases, we do. However, with the presumptive under 1 gram, we do hear from law enforcement, well, you know, it's hard for me to think about arresting somebody when I know you guys aren't going to file. I'd rather do a social contact. And I'm sure that Major Howard might be able to speak to kind of what that impact has on law enforcement in terms of what our office has chosen to do. And by no means has our office tried to tell law enforcement, well, you shouldn't arrest based on that. We're utilizing it as a resource issue, and we did put into that new bad change, or I'm sorry, filing standard change, a way for law enforcement to flag simply somebody who regardless of the filing standards needs to be considered for prosecution. And so that's something that we have law enforcement currently utilizing even with our VADs. I hope that answers your question.
When there's an arrest made or whatever, does the person get to choose lead, or does the officer say you're going into lead? Because I know the officers have offered help to people,
So
and
yeah.
it's usually they say no.
The officer decides whether they want to offer that opportunity to the person, and then the person can either accept the opportunity or decline. But the first decision that he's made is whether the officer thinks this person is a good candidate. If the officer thinks they're not, then they just follow the traditional arrest and book. But I'll tell you, having worked here for 29 years now, and arresting people over and over and taking them to jail, it's like the definition of insanity, right? They're out of jail before I'm done with my paperwork, right? And then they're committing more crimes. And so this gives us another tool in the toolbox to say, rather than address the symptom, whatever it is they're doing, trespassing, shoplifting, let's try to get to the root of the problem. And so now, if it's someone I think is a good candidate, I can say, why don't we try to get you help for the reason you're doing this instead of what you just did? And I can introduce them to an outreach team, and if they're willing to go down that path, I'm happy not to see them prosecuted, because that wasn't working anyway, right?
Probably a really important concept is that lead is, it's called diversion, which sounds like letting go of somebody, but it's really the opposite of letting go of somebody. It's the beginning of grabbing onto somebody, not through coercion, but through incredibly effective techniques of engagement. And so it's more, not less. And that's the rallying ground. Like, that's why people sort of come around to this approach. Because there is, even if the old ways were super effective, we have resource constraints on using them for the scope of the problem that we have. Also, they weren't particularly effective. So if we can provide law enforcement with additional teammates and strategies that are more effective, then from a community perspective, you have more of a response to the problem than you would have had before. Maybe, I was gonna ask if maybe Brandy could speak to this does not work. This is the super crucial point. This does not work if who the individual is diverted to work with are not super skilled and effective. They need strategies for engaging a population that's often hard to engage. You cannot sit in your office. You gotta be going out and you gotta be willing to work creatively with law enforcement. It's very special social workers, call them like guerrilla social workers. They're just like very result oriented, and Brandy represents an organization that has defined that field in our region and nationally. So
I'm gonna do just a quick segue between you and Brandy, which is to sort of set the stage for this. So Brandy and I have both been doing this work for a long time. And I used to run a social service agency, and I would have police officers routinely bring people by. And I had zero to give them, except for maybe a pair of socks and a cup of soup. And so what LEAD is doing is giving this person a dedicated case manager that can work with them and has other resources. And so to set the stage for this, in terms of our arrest-based diversions, something like 91% of those people make it in to do their intake. So we are having a spectacularly high rate of success in engaging people that have never been engaged before, and it's all because of Brandy and her team.
That sets me up. Do you want to ask your question before I go?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. So for us, like she said, we get the warm handoff and then we show up on the scene. And so Lisa talked about how officers are seeing these people for generations of poverty and substance use. So just imagine the vulnerabilities that are layered with that, the trauma these folks are experiencing emotionally, historically. There's so many barriers, and what LEAD has given us the opportunity to do through Public Defenders Association is the resources and funding to remove those major barriers to get to the core of what is going on. And so that's the secret sauce in all of it. And so we use harm reduction techniques and trauma-informed care, motivational interviewing to really work with folks. And so it's long-term incremental change that is what really happens. And so for REACH as a whole, we've been doing this for about 20 years, working with chronically homeless folks with substance use issues, and we're just meeting them where they're at. So wherever the officer is in the community, we're working with the client there, we're going back to outreach in those places. I mean, even for me, if I have any staff that are at the office all the time, it's a problem for me. I need to let you go. I need you out into the community looking for folks, finding folks, moving people along this continuum of care. The other secret is just the high level of communication we have with prosecutors and law enforcement about what's going on. I can't tell you how many times law enforcement comes out to help us outreach this person. We get to call that officer up and be like, I tried this many times to engage them. Do you might know what is the care, what is the resource, what is the hook for this person? That officer might help us out with that. And so it's a real team approach to getting at what's going on with this person and why they're not following through with any of the other systems.
Any particular age? You started at age, or is it
We do 18 and over.
18?
Yeah, we don't work with youth. That's the
Is
whole-
there any group that works with you?
Not in this way, I can't say, not with the LEAD model.
there's not a per se prohibition on doing this for youth. There's one additional hurdle, which is that beyond sort of a very superficial contact, to have permission to provide services, you're gonna need parent or guardian permission. And so how you set up a diversion arrangement with somebody where you don't know if their parent or guardian's gonna allow that deeper work, we have a framework for that, but just because we have resource scarcity even for adults where we're working right now, so being like, pushing on into the juvenile population feels a little scattered.
Yeah, I understand. My concern is, it usually starts way before 18.
Absolutely.
The problem, because of family.
And officers have flagged, like, it's kind of weird that if you have a 19-year-old who commits this, low-level felony, you can do this strategy that really makes sense and takes into consideration what will work with them. If a 17-year-old who does the exact same thing, you've got to charge them with a felony to do anything, you gotta take them to court. So there's definitely logic that would dictate you make the same thing available to younger people, and I think we'll get there in pretty much all the jurisdictions. And you could, because there's this dedicated funding for the outside of Seattle sites, you can kind of do, a community that's opting to do this could define the target population or problem that you're solving quite differently than we have in Seattle, that's totally fine. And if youth is the thing, we'll figure it out, so.
And Houston is working with doing a youth diversion right now, so they would be the first place. Every place in the country that's currently doing this 18 and over, exactly for the reasons that Lisa mentioned. Houston is trying to figure out a way around this consent issue.
I just wanted to add on there too that for our organization, we're not a compliance organization. So clients can come work with us. They might still be using substances. They might even be under the influence in the moment, and we just work through that with them. Some folks want to go right after treatment. Some folks are not ready yet. We still work on all the things they want to do. Somebody might not be ready to quit using crack, but they might want housing. So we're still going to work in that. In the meantime, what usually happens for folks as barriers get removed, they start to see some of the magic, they bring it up on their own, like, oh, I might want to try this, I might want to try that. Maybe I can make these housing appointments if I was on some assisted methadone treatment that allowed me to be able to wake up and do that kind of thing. And so it just kind of, we work with them and set their plan with them together.
So how in this community, since we're not a city, we're incorporated, how do we get lead in this community? What are the steps?
That is such a good question. The elected leadership for this area is already on board, right? So the executive and the council they put this money in and it's available. Honestly, our office is the project management team, and kind of we hold the contract to figure this out. It's a little bit of an organic process of interest and readiness. So we're coming to these meetings, talking to you. If there is interest, let us know in any of the ways. And there are a couple of other communities that are exploring, but they do not have the same degree of law enforcement readiness that the Sheriff's Office has. Sheriff's Office has been a partner from day one, but has never been able to bring this resource into an unincorporated area, and has made it clear to us that they are very ready to do that in unwilling communities.
Have you reached out to Coalition for Drug-Free Youth?
So we would love, no, not that I know of, but this would be like super valuable to us to have. We have a number of sort of knowledgeable partners who are familiar with important stakeholders in White Center who we'll go talk with. If there are stakeholders you think are important for us to go talk with, we will go do that. So direct away, that would be really helpful.
So is it up,
We better.
There's two other women here that have
so
had
is it up to the community then to reach out and make that effort? So individually, are people, is that where we are?
I'm gonna leave a stack of cards. Any way of reaching out will work. Yeah, and we'll just sort of follow it from there.
Good.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'll say it. So I've been studying this problem I've been living on Myers Way, just right by the border for 5 years, so you can understand why I work in preventative medicine. So I'm wondering how the navigation teams work with LEAD, and I've been thinking we should probably cross-train almost all officers with both skill sets. I mean, I know it's a lot of skill sets, so you've got to have, I've watched a lot of videos lately on the nav teams and what they do, and they're the guerrilla other side of it, So I like that, how they're doing that. Let's see. Do you have a website or like number of people helped, that sort of data? And then one last thing on the data that the navigation team, Eric Zurr, said that he is collecting data, but it is not getting shared. So they're doing really rigorous data, meaningful stuff, and it's not getting shared amongst the proper, services or entities. I mean, you can imagine. So I feel like that's a disconnect, and if he's saying that, yeah, they're doing a lot of good work. So I'd like to see where they differ, how can they overlap, and then the youth thing is obviously the prevention part of that would be good. And I think that's kind of a three-part question.
I can't speak to the data, but I can speak to the navigation team and working with Sergeant Reserve. So our organization, REACH, Evergreen Treatment Services, is the contractor for working with the navigation team. And so REACH as a whole, we leverage all of our programs and all of our resources to support our programs. Sometimes the navigation team is finding some of the folks that have been referred by law enforcement that we haven't been able to work with. sometimes we're able to use some of their shelter beds if need be, and vice versa. Their sergeants are making referrals to the lead team to get the necessary folks in, to lead. So we work in partnership along that vein. Housing is a big issue. I mean, you know, I think about, you know, we talk about this homeless crisis all over media and everything, and the biggest piece is housing. If we are not securing low-income supportive housing for folks, none of this makes any sense.
Right.
And so we need people to be talking to their legislators,
Yeah.
talking to their community members about getting supportive housing in some of these communities. And the biggest thing is really people reframing the homeless discussion, the poverty
Yeah.
discussion. As a community, we have not supported our community well, and we have this issue of homelessness and poverty out there that we all need to be a part of fixing. And so, you know, when you're at community meetings and it gets really, you know, I don't have a good word for it, but kind of some of the comments are despicable about what they want folks to do with people who are struggling. Just to reframe that message around the resources that we need to make sure people have that are accessible to support their needs. And so that would be my thoughts.
Well, thank you for your work, and hopefully we can work together. I think that the public is a missing link that we could be, you know, handing out sort of cards or something. We should be the sort of mini lead connection or something where, because I see people almost every day where it's like, if I could just connect you right now, like I see you're in trouble, you're newly homeless, I see your suitcases, you know, like, I mean, just, I saw a person the other night, like that was just ridiculous that I can't just say, okay, we're gonna connect you now.
So that's a key component of LEAD is that the social contact referral channel can be accessed by community members.
Good.
Has to be cleared through law enforcement because unlike the navigation team or other human services, LEAD it's a program that uses human services tools, but it is a crime prevention, crime response, crime reduction program. So there's like a Venn diagram of people who are in need and people who commit crimes, and there are people who commit crimes who are not in need, and there are people who are in need who don't commit crimes, but that intersection is really where LEAD does its work. So it's not the all-purpose response to need, but for people who are committed, you can see that crimes are being committed, and yet you could have a pretty good sense it's coming from unmet needs. You could initiate a social contact referral. The data issue, so Sergeant Zer's data, the NAV team's data are like trapped in a little database that can't talk to anybody else. I think we're developing the answer that also is going to be the answer for them. A very convenient fact is that the King County Sheriff's Office and the Seattle Police Department are both now going to have the same records management system. And that means that that if we develop a database in which the program data sit, that records management system can query, like a warrant query, both will be able to extract data. And we have Seattle IT department developed specifications for that, and we're now looking for funding for it. Can I get Microsoft to donate that? So anyway, so Sergeant Zer is super excited about this development.
Good.
Because if we can do that, they can kind of take the same platform.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering what LEAD does to connect to social services agencies that are already in that area to support this initiative. Also wondering about where your funding is coming from for these 4 new initiatives. And lastly, because it's hard to get worded, definitely want to second the idea of extending this to youth in our community.
I can do social services real quick. So for our case managers, we're really, we consider ourselves brokers to other resources. And so we are sitting with the client and finding out what they actually need. Like our larger parent company is a methadone clinic, but if that is not the right fit for that client, we might look at therapeutic health services or somewhere else. So whatever service that person